came to make this film?
I cold called Tom McGuane.
Just cold call?
Cold emailed.
Okay.
Yeah. It was, yeah, I was a big, I was just going through a bit of an obsession with Tom and Jim, probably 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. And was
Just
kind of,
through their writing?
through their writing. Well, the full story is, I don't know if I've told Frank this, I told Jimmy this, but I was a parrot head in like 6th grade, like a massive Jimmy Buffett fan, and went through a pirate phase where I took the bed out of my room and put a hammock in there, and wanted to get tattoos on the back of my eyelids so people would think I was awake when I was asleep, based on a character on one of Jimmy's books.
Yep.
But in that book, he talks about his brother-in-law, Tom McGuane, but I had misread that as Roger McGuinn. And for 20-something years, I thought Jimmy was brother-in-law with the guy from The Birds.
Okay.
Until someone sent me Some Horses, which is a collection of short stories of Tom's later on in my life, and that took me back full circle to some of his literature and Jim's poetry and the Tarpon film. So a Tarpon guide gave me Tom's email, and I just reached out asking if he'd be interested in me coming to visit him.
So, are you from Florida or from the Key West?
I'm
area?
from Texas.
I'm from Texas. Okay. So, I had never heard of tarpon, the fish, or this kind of fishing. Can you talk about? It's a catch and release type of fishing.
Catch and release, and they're just huge, 200, anywhere between 120 to 300 pound
Okay.
prehistoric looking fish.
Okay.
And
So
I mean,
very hard to catch.
very hard to catch.
They're very crafty.
Yeah.
And it's like a battle. It's like an athletic event. And it's pretty special.
It's like I think in hunting it would be, bow hunting with an elk, where it's hard to, it requires hunting and stalking, and then the hardest tool you could possibly find to do it is the equivalent of tarpon fishing. So I think once you continually to excel, that's the ultimate challenge as a outdoorsman, is tarpon fishing.
So is Tom McGuane the first person of this group who kind of went to Key West, discovered that he liked it there, and then he invited all the rest of this group? Is that kind of how it came to be?
Yeah.
I'm not sure he invited them all.
Yeah, some were invited, some
Kind
weren't.
of found their way there on their own. I know Jimmy came down with Jerry Jeff Walker. And, for me, this movie's about friendship. And Jimmy and Jerry Jeff were friends from that moment that he took them. Tom and Jimmy and I, he was my best friend. And so
So you're part of this friend group too, then?
Well, yeah, and it was really the beginning of the year. Jimmy and I go way back. We've known each other since 1980, and we just love to share the worlds that we live in and work in. And so I go to him for music questions, and he comes to me for film questions. And last January, he said, "Hey, they discovered this movie that the Frenchman Christian had shot," and I knew Christian's daughter, and everybody knows everybody in the Jimmy Tom world. And he said, "Would you take a look and see what you think?" And I looked at this, and as a documentary filmmaker, you go, I'm looking for these gems, these little lost treasures, and there was this movie, and here were these guys, and Scott had the smarts and the persistence to go after this because he saw a story there. And then Tom, none of these guys want to talk on camera, right? They don't want to, they go, "Who are you? I don't want to talk about this. Can I have final cut?" That's the other thing. No, you can't. It's a documentary. That's why and he sent me the rough cut, and I went, "Oh my God, this is gold. I'm happy to, be involved however you want me to be involved." So that's how it started.
Yeah, it was a gamble. When I started with Tom, I hadn't been in touch with Jimmy or knew that I had access to the film. So
Okay.
it was a bit of a, like Frank says, a persistent leap of faith.
So she shows the film in its state when it's sort of like vinegar syndrome, like encrusted and so was it in that state when you heard that there was a film, and then did you need to wait for the footage to be like restored?
It wasn't in that state. It had been at some point in the 90s. They had burnt some DVDs that I think they mailed out through some, website, and then that got pirated, and it the quality was not great back then. So we had a version of that we sent off and got restored and brought up to 4K and color corrected, and those were copies that she had in the those were negatives. But so it was in a little better state to start with, but not a lot of people had seen it.
I feel like the tarpon fishing film sort of brings everything together. It sort of weaves everything, because there's just like there's so many different people in this group, musicians and writers, and with all their own lives, but they were all a part of this like section of life in this part of the world. And I think it's really interesting because I feel like a lot of 60s, and for some reason a lot of people that were part of like the folk music or folk art scene aren't that well known now. So when I see a film like this, it introduces me to people that I didn't know about. Like, I knew about Richard Brautigan, and I knew Carl Hyacint's work, and of course Jimmy Buffett, but I had never heard of Tom McGuane's work before. And I think that sometimes, I don't know, do you have an opinion about sometimes why certain writers are...
Well, I think affordability is you gravitate. When I was trying to explain to them what I had in mind, my analogy was there's a, I'm from Austin, Texas, and there's a film called Heart-Worn Highways, and it was like Townes Van Zandt and Guy Clark and a bunch of like-minded musicians who all lived in Austin at that time, and they're swapping songs, and it was cheap to live in Austin, and there was the spirit and this funkiness and this bohemia. So there's whether it's Paris in the 20s or Austin with Willie and those guys, or Key West, I think there's certain funky bohemian places that are cheap to live in that attract artists. And I think Tom was the first one down there to fish, but Jimmy came down there on his own. And I think, a lot of people discover Tom's writing and, Jim's writing or some of these other writings, but I think there's a whole, there's a lot of people that only know Jimmy after 1985. And he's got 5 incredible albums in this era that I think, most people aren't aware of that are as good as anything Townes Van Zandt wrote or any of those guys. That I hope this film turns on to people to, like, he was a real artist. And Tom, that's the only, talking about Final Cut, the only thing that still bugs Tom about the movie is there's some clever editing when we're talking about Jimmy making the bestsellers list, and it makes it look like Jim and Tom were disappointed or threatened. And I think they were really happy. Clearly, like, the joke is that these guys were too, they were just against each other, competitive poets, serious poets, and Jimmy comes in from the back door and just... But there was like a healthy brotherly competition that elevated everyone. And I think they truly loved each other. But it's like, I think this film was about them maybe not really men aren't great at communicating that or even being aware of that at the time. And Jim had just died when we started filming it. Richard Brautigan, it was clear Tom McGuane hadn't even thought about that. And then the week we finished editing, Guy passed away. And the night we premiered it, Jimmy passed away.
Wow.
Yeah, in Telluride. We were all in Telluride.
Yeah.
It was the most amazing.
And he passed away the night of your premiere?
Yeah. During the Q&A. Uh-oh.
Yeah. That happened. We just filmed, I don't know if I told you this, but we filmed it in Key West last week at the Key West Film Festival. And Jimmy's daughters were there and his sisters and Tom's family. and we filmed it. It was supposed to be a double feature and another film afterwards, but we filmed it, and right when Tom and I got up for the Q&A, the electricity went out on the entire island. And
Wow.
yeah, it was
I didn't,
spooky.
Yeah, well, Jimmy was there.
Yeah.
No more movies after my movie. Cut it.
Yeah.
I just think, yeah, it's when you talk, it's interesting when you talk about the two of them being competitive. I think, you find that a lot in groups of artists. They sort of drive their competition drives them to be like the best writers or the best, craftspeople that they can be, because they have someone else they're trying to do a one-up.
Yeah, and I like to look at it as it inspires them to another level.
Yeah.
I'm doing a Beach Boys doc, and the Beach Boys had never heard of the Beatles. And when the Beatles came on the scene, they were just, to them, it was just this other band, and then they went, whoa, now we gotta, gotta step it up. And they became not rivals but they inspired each other. And I don't think there'd be Sgt. Pepper's without Pet Sematary. I could be wrong, but the way they all talk about it and the way Paul talks about it, so it was kind of like that healthy, friendly competition that they inspired each other to write, and they would share each other's, work and critique each other's work, and it made it better.
And steal from it, as you
Yeah.
said. Yeah. But I think there's the other take, like, and I'm sure, I think as an artist, it's like the people I've seen that have been successful at it aren't making it. They're not. Their target isn't for everyone. They have one person in mind that they want to like. If there's one, if they're, I'm sure that you have, like, maybe someone you're married to or someone that you're,
that's possible.
someone that you work with as a contemporary that you have them in mind. Like, I want them to like this movie, and if that person likes it, then the odds are that someone. But I feel like a lot of people I know that are artists, like, I've got a friend that I know of, like, if I send a song or a movie to, like, that's who it's for. And then if that's a success, then it will. And I feel like these guys were like that too. They were so insular and so bright and intelligent that they were oftentimes what they were writing or singing, Jimmy would bring a song to them first before it went to anyone else.
Yeah.
I feel like so many people of this particular era, like this group of people were all of these people seem very connected to nature. They all seem very connected to being outdoors and with nature. Did you ever think about like all these writers and musicians and their relationships with nature, and they sort of like, it's like they all sort of got inspiration off of being outside. Like, is that what attracted you to this group of people? Do you relate to that?
I relate to it, yeah, absolutely. And I think all those guys authentically, again, going back to like characteristics of successful artists I know, they use the other to inspire it. And like Jimmy was clearly a nautical ocean dweller, and the music and the themes that he sang about were very genuine. And I think it's hard to just be in a studio and create meaningful art. And I think same thing with Tom, who would spend half the year in a river or on a boat fishing. Like to have that time to gather your inspiration to go out to do it. I think there's a lot of value in that. And rather than
Hemingway was definitely known for that too. Like,
Hemingway,
he needed to be outside fishing, doing outdoor stuff.
Yeah, I'm interested in dynamic people that have more interest than the thing that they're.
Do you think that was particularly of that era where a lot of artists were connected to nature, like more so than it is now, where artists find themselves inspired by nature?
I think there's still plenty of it out there. I think I think it's harder. I don't know. It's like I think there's a lot of people. There's a guy that I'm friends with named Goth Babe. That's a successful musician. That's a sailor and fly fisherman. And there's a lot of folks that I think still find a way to blend those two worlds. And I think there's a lot of value in it.
Do you guys fly fish?
I do.
I don't.
My grandpa was a fly fisherman.
I'm pretty bored with fishing all day.
My grandpa was a fly fisherman. He made his own flies. He had waders. He had several pairs of like the hip wader things, which I did a lot of fishing, but not fly fishing. It looks very hard.
Well, even Jimmy and Tom, I think they had different approaches to fly fishing.
Yeah.
I think Tom was a very serious fly fisherman, and Jimmy he had drones out and paddle boards and gadgets, and I think he was having fun
Jimmy
with it.
was a multitasker, ADD. Whenever we play golf, he'd find a way to play about 6 holes, about half of each hole, and then he'd pick it up and we'd go. So he was just out there to say he played golf. The same way with his fishing. Although he was very serious about bone fishing.
Yeah.
He loved to bone fish. But
What's bone
he was
fishing?
also, kind of the same thing with tarpons. It's a, kind of a sport.
Okay.
But what Jimmy loved to do was sail. I love to sail. I grew up in Newport, and I do share that love of the ocean. And I know that it's like freedom, and it does open you up, I think, and to your thinking. And that was the thing about Jimmy. He was authentic and genuine. What he wrote about and the life he led and his lifestyle was authentic. And I think he gave that spirit, and he told me at the end, just keep it going, keep the party going, keep that spirit going. Don't feel bad for me. So we're trying to do that. It's not easy, but we're trying to do it.
Frank mentioned that none of these guys want to talk. Why is that? So first part of the question is, why don't they want to talk? And the second part is, how do you, as a documentary filmmaker, get them to tell the stories that you want them to tell?
Well, that's kind of how we had the opportunity. The Tarpon film was a failure in the filmmaking. Like the filmmaker wanted to go make a film about writers, and no one wanted. They wouldn't talk, or Tom was on so much acid that they couldn't find him, and his voiceover was inaudible, so they had to have Jim redo it. That's why Jim's voices. So they came all the way over to France to film it, and the writers gave them, I think, half a day. So it ended up being a fishing film. But so I think in one way this version is one, giving context of those guys in that film, but also I think a version of that film that I think they would have liked to write that's more in depth on the writing and the friendship. I don't know, I think people that are, I think someone, you might have said it or Tom said it, but Jimmy had no rear view mirror. Tom had no rear view mirror. Like some people are that are that productive and present and creative. Like they don't spend a lot of time sitting around thinking about the past or feeling the need to talk about it when they're so I think they were interested in the next thing. He would tell me all day long about a new cup holder idea he has for his paddleboard for his drink that could hold your drone and your
he's a gadget man too. I mean, he was just curious about everything. And on the way over, I was listening to one of his songs, The Oldest Surfer on the Beach. That was him. He just kept surfing, he paddleboarding, keep going forward. Don't look in the rearview mirror.
I think the answer to your question, I think I caught them at a really interesting time with COVID, where we had some time to reflect on all that for the first time. Tom had just lost an ex-wife, a best friend. I think COVID was the first time they became aware that it's not forever, and that they felt isolated and started probably realizing that it was the best time of their lives, and friendship. They've since went on and made really intense lifelong friendships, but friendships at a certain age just can't be duplicated, and that's like a bond forever. And I think I just came in at a time where that was the first time they've had a minute to think about that, and I think that was, I didn't quite know what the film was going to be about until we were editing. Bennett, our editor's here, and we found some verite moments of Tom saying, "I don't like old pictures."
Yeah.
And that to me became the whole film of it going from that to him thinking about it and being.
Yeah, because his wife says, "You're not nostalgic."
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
He really wasn't.
No,
Don't like
even
it.
in his Q&A, I mean, he's like, whoa. He's
Yeah.
he's not nostalgic. He's not. I don't know. He's just
He's not sentimental. that way.
sentimental. That's
Yeah.
he
Curious
is
because
definitely not sentimental.
I feel like we associate writers with nostalgia so much. So it's curious. It's interesting to think of a writer who's not really nostalgic.
It's weird. I mean, those guys were. I mean, if you go, they were forward-thinking, out there guys. All of them. I mean, Jimmy too, and like they were, before Hunter S. Thompson. Tom's writing was like the precursor to that, but denser and harder to understand, but just as out there and just as like laced with drug fuel,
Well, I think you're right that there are these little pockets of time and people. Laurel Canyon is another one.
Right.
I mean, that's never going to happen again. It happened then. And this Key West thing with these writers. And granted, I mean, I guess because Jimmy had a couple of hit books, they were all writers. And, why they were there, we don't know. It's all about serendipity, coincidence, whatever you want to call it. But it's that little pocket of time. And there was this footage that none of us had ever seen. It was fantastic from this movie that never saw the light of day. And that's what you love when you're making a doc, I think.
Yeah.
I know a guy who's a chef, and he moved to Key West purely because he wanted to dive for his own food. That's why he moved.
There you go.
He dives for spiny lobsters.
Yeah.
That's his passion. And he's a chef and he loves food, so
Yeah.
he kind of mixed his all of his desires together. But he just had this dream of, I want to dive for my own food, everything that.
There's a lot of free spirits down
Yeah,
there.
yeah, right. So the part in the movie that made me tear up a lot is the sequence where someone's reading the poem and someone's standing out on a hillside or something.
Mhm.
There, what poem or book is that sequence from?
That was from the poem's called "Hard Times" by Jim Harrison.
Okay.
And it was, believe it or not, even Jimmy, who's got to have the most archives out of anyone I knew, there wasn't a lot of footage to pull from. There wasn't a lot of old photos that I had access to. I mean, I would love to, I think this is the right length of film for this specific friendship and era, but, there will be longer films made about, Jimmy, and certainly each guy can have his own long story. But so we were kind of just trying to find whatever we could, and I think maybe our editor Bennett found this old news clip from local Montana news of Jim reading that poem. So I thought, and then so the next shoot I went to Montana and had Tom read it. I also had Tom read what he wrote and read at Jim's funeral, and then went back to Antelope Butte, which is in Paradise Valley, where a lot of those guys hung out, and did that drone, just hoping that it might connect and see if there's a way to do that. But
Yeah, that's beautiful.
yeah, Jim's a great writer.
Well, congratulations to you too.
Thank you.
I had some people asking me if this has a streaming home yet, or if it has. Have you decided what its life will be outside of this or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
If there's any streaming homes out in the audience,
Tell your friends.
yeah, tell your friends.
Are there any questions from the audience? Anybody?
Yeah.
Frank, how did you meet Jimmy?
Oh. Okay. The quick story is Aspen, 1980. After Raiders, Stephen and Harrison Ford and his girlfriend at the time, Melissa Matheson, were in Aspen, and they invited Stephen to come ski. It must have been 1980, so it would have been December of 1980. And Stephen sent Kathy and I to set up the condo at the bottom of Little Nell. And Harrison was there with Melissa, and so we were skiing and setting up this thing, and Stephen kept saying, I'll come tomorrow, I'll be there tomorrow. We had, 4-wheel drives and ski passes and skis and everything. Well, he never came. So we had this great time there, and on New Year's, Harrison said, well, come to there's this New Year's party, and it's a private party, and there'll be all these people there. And so Kathy and I went. We weren't together at that time, but we were there, and had all just made Raiders together, so we were great friends. So we went, and Kathy and I kind of sat in the back, and this was a wild party where the Eagles were playing. Andy Warhol was there stamping pictures. There were all these crazy people there, and Jimmy was there. And I didn't know, I finally told him about 20 years ago, I had never heard of him. I didn't know Come Monday was his only song. So anyway, the night was over, and it turns out that the party had been thrown by Jane Buffett, Jimmy's wife. So, but she left early. And they lived down valley, and so we were out getting in our car, and here came this guy, like he probably was in Key West with his guitar in a case and coming out looking around like, how do I get home? And I said, well, we'll take you. And so we gave him a ride home. And the next week, this gift arrived at Amblin, and it was a tour jacket, a nicely embroidered tour jacket about somewhere over China. It was a beautiful jacket. And it was from Jimmy. It said, thanks for looking out for me.
Oh.
And I thought, who is this guy? I want to get to know this guy. And that was the start of a beautiful
amazing.
friendship.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that.
And when was Tarpon shot?
73.
Oh, wow.
I think it said the link at the end of the movie where you could watch the whole thing, right? Is it?
I think they're gonna put out the full thing too.
Is it feature length?
It's 60 minutes.
60.
It has a real Agnes Varda kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
The Tarpon film.
Yeah, it's yeah, he was, I mean, I think Christian had, like I said, he worked for Orson Welles and was a very, like, I think ardent verite, not really manufacturing anything. There's a lot of silence, a lot of just like the sound design and just the sound that they got with two guys was incredible. But yeah, it'll be out there. I think the hope is to re-release that whenever this finds a home or is distributed. And I think most people will probably be inclined to go back and watch that whole thing after watching this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we did use a lot of the footage.
Yeah.
I'm curious about Brautigan. I know he spent time in Montana as well. I didn't know he spent time in Key West, but he's such a different writer than Harrison and McWayne. Did he, even though he was successful, did he fit in with those guys? To me, it seems like a very different sort.
He did. From what I can tell, is you can't out-weird those guys. Like, everyone was unfazed by everything, and I think back then they were all pretty out there. And I think Tom met Brautigan in Bolinas maybe, or maybe because Tom I think went to Stanford at some point. They met on the West Coast, and I think he lived in Japan at some point. But I think they acknowledged him as the weirdest. But I think there's even some, his writing was pretty esoteric and out there. But I think all those guys they were all on some weird similar wavelength, and you weren't gonna offend anyone in that crowd.
The story that he told about Richard Brautigan and the urn. When I watched it, I took it as Brautigan was telling him that he was going to kill himself, but is that the way that Tom took it, or no?
I don't think so. I don't think Tom. I think if Tom, I'm sure it was a abbreviated story. I don't think Tom would have just allowed him to go to Japan and knowing that that was gonna unfold. You know, but I think he was one of those guys that when the phone rang, no one was surprised. And it was a long time coming, and I think there was plenty of efforts to try to steer him back in a better direction. But I don't know. I would imagine the way that those guys communicated and how, you know, shifty. I doubt it was really presented to Tom as this is my urn and
Right.
my ashes will come in here when I kill myself.
Just the cryptic, someone's gonna call you for this.
Yeah.
It made me want to do that to one of my friends. To be like, to give them an object and be like, someone's gonna call you for this.
Yeah. Well, there's no one. I think the common thread. I think Jim was the king of turns of phrases, and Tom was the king with words. Like I don't think I met anyone better with even his emails. I print out sometimes and just keep.
Yeah.
He's really articulate. So who knows what Richard really
Anybody
says?
else? Okay, we're wrapping up.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank you
so
guys for
much.
watching.